Hey, so with the new year, a lot of people are thinking about how do I make my property management more efficient? This video is for you. So if you're wanting to know when it's time for you to hire a full-time property manager, here's my simple answer backed by one simple equation. If you like this video, if you like the content that I push out, please like and subscribe down below. It really helps me out a lot. But let's get into when it's time for you to hire a property manager for your buy and hold investing business. There's two very legitimate reasons why you might hire an employee for your small business that I'm not going to go into in depth here. So one is your personal time is valuable enough that you need to offload some of the work for your rental portfolio. So if you're a doctor, a successful lawyer, some other professional where you're very busy with your personal time, and your personal time that you are working is actually very valuable, then you may want an employee even if it's a financial loss to your real estate business, just because you need to spend your time. Your time's better spent with your professional job. The other legitimate reason why that you would hire an employee that I'm not going to cover here is hiring a part-time employee. And I've had part-time employees. I've had several part-time employees over the years that were, W-2 paid by my real estate company to do real estate work. But there's so many different aspects of hiring a part-time employee and the responsibilities that they could get and the amount of authority they have in your business that's just a whole nother discussion. So those two reasons I'm not going to talk about in this video. High paid professional, and so you need an employee just because of the time value, and the profitability isn't really the biggest issue. And the second one is hiring a part-time employee. I'm not going to get into that one because there's so many aspects of hiring a part-time employee and their roles and responsibilities that we don't really have time for that in this video. So when does it make sense to hire a full-time employee for your real estate investing business? And this is specifically focused around buy and hold rentals. So if you're flipping or wholesaling, then you're going to have other considerations. But when you're talking about hiring a full-time property manager for your buy and hold real estate investing rental business, this is the video for you. So first of all, I'm not going to tie this to a dollar amount of real estate because that's really so variable. For example, if you have a $5 million paid off cash house in Southern California, and that's your only real estate investment and it's paid off, that is totally different than if you have a portfolio, a $5 million portfolio of $50,000 houses that are 80% leveraged in the Midwest. Totally different scenarios. So I really don't think you can give a hey, when you've made it to this much dollar amount of real estate, this is when it makes sense to hire a property manager. You could still say $5 million paid off in the Midwest, because someone might say once you get to this much equity, it makes sense to hire a property manager. But I still don't think that's true, because $5 million in equity and paid off $50,000 homes in the Midwest is a totally different management responsibility than $5 million paid off single family home in Southern California. Totally different. So I wouldn't tie it to a certain dollar amount. Similarly, I wouldn't tie it to a certain number of units, although that starts getting closer. But if you're talking about, a lot of times people say, 30 to 50 units is the normal burden for a full-time property manager. But I think that varies, because 30 to 50 low-end units with a lot of deferred maintenance is totally different than 30 to 50 units in a brand new apartment complex. So those units, I would also say, is not a fair thing to tie when you need a property manager. So when do you need a property manager? And here, I think, is the answer. It varies. No, nobody wants to hear that. That's a cop-out. So I'm going to tell you, here's what it varies on from my experience. And this is when I felt like it was worth it for me to hire a full-time property manager. So ultimately, it boils down to an equation. And that equation, I would say, is when the cost of a property manager, so a property manager is going to traditionally be between 8 to 10% of your rents, and they'll have different fee structures. But when that cost of the property manager plus the vacancies that you would get under traditional property management plus the maintenance expenses that you save by having your own property manager equals the cost of the compensation of the property manager or less. All right, so nobody wants to cop out with an equation, so let's talk about each one of those. So let's talk about a small portfolio where you're grossing $10,000 a month in rents, right? So if you're grossing $10,000 a month in rent, to have a local realtor manage that properties, whatever number of properties it is, typically it would end up being about 10% of the rent. So to make that easy, let's just say $1,000 is what you would pay the property manager. Now, you say, I can't hire a full-time employee for $1,000. Yes, that's true. You can't hire a full-time employee, especially not one that you want, for $1,000 total compensation, pay and benefits a month. No way. So, and you might say, well, I can get a part-time employee. Well, that's not really true, because now that part-time employee has other obligations outside of working for you. They can't follow through in the key times. But we're not talking about part-time, we're talking about full-time here. So there's your cost of the property manager. Now, next thing is vacancies. So a lot of property managers, they don't really start working on getting a tenant in your house until the previous tenant has left. Now, in more urban areas with more professional property management companies, they do lead turn this. So the places where I have property managers, traditional property managers that are realtors, brokers, or property management company owners, I do have property managers on some of my houses, and in those areas, I have property managers that I pay commission-based management fees to, but they're very professional, and they make sure they lead turn all of my vacancies 60 days prior to vacancies at least. They already have a good handle on if my current tenant's staying or if they're gonna have to put a new tenant in, and they're already working on getting that next vacancy turned. So when you're talking about average people though, the average property manager isn't really gonna turn to on that vacancy until it's available, because they don't wanna waste their time, and they don't want to do it. And so that leads to vacancies of 3 to 5 weeks between properties. So if now we're talking about the vacancy expense. So we already talked about the management fee, now we're talking about the vacancy expense. If you have your own full-time property manager, you can make sure their job roles and responsibilities, they're working on getting that vacancy filled, as far out as you want. So what are your standards? How far out do they need to be communicating with that tenant? So when you're talking about your full-time property manager though, you can have them focused on filling that vacancy as far out as you want. And I'd argue the day one of the lease, they already need to be thinking about the next vacancy. Because in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I'll put the link down below, it's a very important book. They give an example of property managers in a mall situation who had good communication with tenants and reduced their vacancies way more than previously when they didn't have good communication with tenants. So really, just that good communication and good maintenance follow-up with tenants from day one of the lease is preparing for the end of the lease when it's time for that tenant to decide if they want to renew or not. And it's also preparing you if there's needed rent raises or things like that. You're providing that value on the front side, so at the end of the lease, you're already ready for not only the tenant to sign a new lease, but to raise the rent on it as well, in accordance with however the market's doing where you live, and there's no surprises because you've just been adding a tremendous amount of value. So what that does is, for me, that makes sure my vacancies are less than 24 to 48 hours. This is a fact. We've kept vacancies under 48 hours consistently for the last 2 years with a few exceptions, and for the last year with no exceptions that I can think of. So keeping all those vacancies filled within 48 hours by having on-site property management. So let's take that $10,000 a month rent, and now let's look at what would happen if you lost a 1/12 of that rent. So basically a month per property, a 1/12 of that rent regularly, so depending on the number of units, that would actually go up, quite a bit. But so now we'll take that whole rent times the whole year, take a 1/12 of it, and that's probably your realistic cost of using a traditional realtor or property management firm to manage your property. But if you manage your employee well, you can avoid this cost of vacancies in your real estate business. And so we've done that successfully at Common Properties, and that's one of the ways that I'm able to ensure that having a full-time property manager is a good choice for my real estate portfolio. So you have your property manager, you're looking at that equation. And the last factor in that equation that we need to look at is the expense of maintenance. When we look at maintenance expenses, we really have two big expenses. And I would divide those into CapEx and repairs. And I know that's not a technical definition, but let's look at each of those. So when I look at CapEx, I want to look at the major systems that we need to be investing for and preparing for them to break. So when we talk about that, big things that come to mind are HVAC and roofs. You can look at plumbing and electrical as CapEx expenses, but I really wouldn't in single family residential because so many of those can be fall into what I would call repairs. But CapEx, rarely are you going to just patch a roof, and while you will do some HVAC maintenance, usually you're going to end up replacing a system a lot of times. And so we attack both of those to keep my total repair bill well under what some of my peers are doing in the same market where my portfolio is. So talking to my accountant, well, he didn't give me any names or specifics or identifying information. He did pull some of his other customers who have similar size, value portfolios of rental properties where mine are, and their maintenance expenses were a significantly higher percentage of their rents than mine were. And this could be two things. One, possibly they're wrapping some other expenses into maintenance, but we're just going to assume that they're doing everything honestly and by the book. I wouldn't have any reason to believe that anybody working with my accountant is shady. So we'll assume that they're doing everything honestly by the book, and their maintenance expenses are legitimately a higher percentage than mine. I keep mine down by two ways with a full-time property manager. One, CapEx. We can reduce CapEx expenses by regularly inspecting the properties. So weekly we do drive-by inspections of all the houses, and quarterly we do walkthrough inspections of the houses. When we're doing those walkthrough inspections, we're going to take an appropriate technician, because the property manager isn't a maintenance professional. I'm not a maintenance professional. So we'll use a maintenance professional to identify upcoming problems that can help us reduce our CapEx. So with the roof, usually that's pretty visual. You can see if shingles are starting to curl. We don't need a professional to look at the roof to tell us if it's starting to age. We can see a lot of those things and start preparing for them. However, HVAC is the biggest CapEx that we're able to mitigate with a professional. So well before the first freeze and well before the first hot day of every year, we get in the home with a licensed and bonded HVAC technician who is reputable in the area to inspect every single HVAC unit. When we do this, a lot of times we can notice small components that are about to go out. We can clean the units, lube the unit, recharge the coolant in the units, and doing this preventative maintenance is going to help avoid a major problem when that tenant goes to turn on the heater or turn on the AC for the first time that year. So, which also reduces repair expenses. So whenever that first cold day comes, what happens? Everyone in town turns on their heater, right? And now you've got thousands of broken heaters all over town with a limited number of HVAC technicians to go to repair them. So now prices are going up on repairs. Delays are going up because it's taking forever. Your tenant's frustrated that you don't have someone out fixing their heater, but you can't help it because everyone in town's heater's broken and there's only a limited number of people to repair them, and there's only a limited number of parts available. So now when you wait 2 weeks to fix their heater, they're upset at you, you're paying a higher price, everybody loses. But by planning that maintenance out early, we're able to go ahead and get those heaters fixed before it starts getting cold, which has a spin-off benefit. A lot of times when people's heaters break, then they leave the home, go stay with friends for a few days while it's cold and your pipes freeze. So now you got a plumbing expense after the heat expense. So we're able to avoid all of that by making sure all of our heaters work well before it gets cold. Another thing this does, so that with the CapEx part of it, if we can identify heaters that are going out, we can start putting maintenance set-asides for those heaters. We can start getting quotes. And so now, rather than waiting for a heater to go out, someone comes out and says it's broken, and at that point it's cold, our heater's broken, we gotta take whoever we can get just to get our heater working in the house. Now, since we've lead turned that, we've identified those things a way out, we can start getting quotes. We can get somebody who's going to be professional and affordable, and we can decide on a price that we want, we can negotiate that price, and we can get that heater fixed. So that's going to save on our CapEx, whereas maybe it might have cost us $7,000 to get a professional to do a good heat install. Maybe now we can get that down to $5,000 by getting a few quotes and getting somebody else that we're equally confident with, and we can negotiate that price down because maybe this person is a little less busy at this given time. You know, it's all, it depends on the situation, but now we can save some money by lead turning that CapEx and the capital expense and getting it at a time when we can get a little bit better discount because people aren't as busy. With repairs, having a property manager full-time is also very beneficial, whereas when you have a property manager that is on a commission basis, they're not going to fix anything. They're only going to hire out handymen and send them every single time. But a lot of your basic things, anyone can fix. You don't have to be a professional. I can go in and change a filter. I can change a return air filter in a home. You know, I can go and I can mail out letters to every single tenant, say, hey, I'm going to come by to inspect air and filters 48 hours from now. If yours is good, no problem. If it's not good, then I'll replace it for you and you'll just have a $10 charge that you'll need to pay. And you can inspect every single home, every single air filter you have to charge. Your property manager can then charge that tenant $10 for the service of changing their air filter, which is a great deal because the air filter itself probably costs $5-6. So the tenant's only paying $4 for you to bring one by and change it, which is their responsibility in my lease anyway. They're supposed to change it. And it also helps reduce your future CapExes. So just by that simple thing that you have a full-time person who can go through and do that every couple months, you know, for your tenants, if you put it in their job description, then you're going to reduce your CapExes long-term because you're not going to be replacing your HVAC units as often. You're going to have a better relationship with your tenants because that gives your property manager an excuse to go into the home, you know, every 2 or 3 months whenever the air filters are due. 3, it's going to reduce your regular maintenance expenses because your property manager can now submit bills to the tenants to get paid back for those filters that they had to change themselves. The tenants who had clean filters because they changed them themselves, you can have an opportunity to have a positive interaction with them. Hey, you know, thanks so much for doing that. Appreciate it. Looks great. Also, you can identify other upcoming maintenance events in the home. If your property manager goes in, you know, they should probably check the doors while they're in the house. They should probably check the faucets, make sure everything's working well. Look for leaks underneath the sinks, signs of water damage around the toilets or the shower. Because if you start identifying those things early, it's going to save you a lot of money on maintenance than if you wait until there's a large problem. So having that full-time property manager really helps you with a lot of maintenance expenses because they're able to do a lot of basic things. Some things we've done recently, like locks needed changed on a house, a door handle needed changed. We don't need a locksmith to go change a doorknob, right? So the property manager is able to go to Lowe's, pick up a new doorknob, put it on a house. I mean, that's not difficult. The instructions are right there in the book. You can see how to change the doorknob, right? I use all quick set, quick keys. So, you know, those also have ready instructions right there. If you change a doorknob or you change a lock, you're able to rekey it to the same locks that the rest of the house has. So there's no need to get somebody out there to do something like that. A lot of basic repairs. If you just need touch-up paint, I try to keep standard paint colors on all my houses. So touch-up paint, you know, you don't need a whole house repainted, but maybe, you know, between tenants a wall needs repainted, or, you know, you need some touch-up done. Since we have standard paint colors at Do Common Properties, that's super easy. Property manager, anyone can just go in there and touch up those paints. So without having to hire somebody for, you know, a few hours or a whole day, you're able to get a lot of that maintenance done just during the normal flow of work, which reduces your overall maintenance expenses. So if you were wondering when it's time for you to hire a property manager, I would say that's the rule of thumb equation. Whenever the cost of a commissioned property manager plus your reduction in vacancies plus your reduction in maintenance expenses equals the total cost, pay and benefits of a full-time property manager in your market, that's when you can financially justify hiring a full-time property manager for your rental business.